Volkswagen just canceled plans for a major manufacturing facility in the United States. Not delayed, not under review, completely canceled. The CEO told Handelsblatt that Trump's tariffs have already cost the company 2.1 billion euros, that's $2.5 billion, in just the first 9 months of 2025, and that, I'm quoting him here, given an unchanged tariff burden, large additional investment cannot be funded. This is the moment when one of Europe's largest industrial companies publicly walks away from American expansion. Cancellations like this don't happen in isolation. They're symptoms of something much larger breaking. I'm Elle of House of Elle on YouTube. I have a PhD in computer science and I work in finance where spotting geopolitical patterns is part of the job. And right now, the data is screaming a pattern that most analysts are perhaps missing. America's tariff strategy is achieving the exact opposite of its stated goals. Let me give you context for this. Volkswagen has been considering a second U.S. manufacturing site off and on since 2018, Trump's first presidency. The prize was an Audi production facility, and this wasn't idle speculation. According to Detroit News, Volkswagen already operates in Tennessee, where they build the ID.4 and Atlas. They're constructing a $2 billion plant in South Carolina for the Scout Motors brand. They even own a large plot of land in South Carolina specifically earmarked for potential Audi expansion. Multiple U.S. states were competing with incentive packages to attract this investment. The original calculus was very straightforward. Subsidies under the Biden administration made the investment economically viable, and local production would insulate Audi from import duties. Unlike BMW and Mercedes-Benz, which build their popular SUVs in the United States, Audi produces models like the Q5 SUV at its Mexico plant. These are vehicles that don't qualify for duty-free imports under the current tariff structures. A U.S. factory would solve that problem, right? Then Trump's tariffs regime changed the entire equation. According to Volkswagen CEO Oliver Bloom, talks with U.S. officials were fair and constructive, but they couldn't really overcome the fundamental math problem. Here's his key insight, and I'm quoting here. This is about economic logic. Investors creating jobs and value need advantages in terms of cost. The tariffs eliminated those advantages. Now, here's where the financial interpretation matters. When you see a company like Volkswagen cancel a multi-billion-dollar investment, you need to understand the opportunity cost calculation happening behind closed doors. Volkswagen currently faces total U.S. tariffs of 27.5%. That's the recent 25% auto tariff stacked on top of pre-existing 2.5% tariff. For context, that would be 2.1 billion euros hit in 9 months, representing real cash drain. When you're hemorrhaging that kind of money quarterly, every dollar you commit to new capital expenditure has to clear a much higher hurdle rate. But it gets worse. According to Reuters, German investment into the United States collapsed 45% year over year in 2025, from 19 billion euros to 10.2 billion euros between February and November last year. I have another video breaking down this much broader German investment exodus in detail, so check the screen for that link right now. But the key point here is that Volkswagen isn't making this decision in a vacuum. They're part of a mass retreat. The financial mechanism at play is what I would call policy risk premium. In normal markets, companies discount future cash flows using relatively stable assumptions about the regulatory environment. But when trade policy becomes a weapon that swings wildly based on political winds, you can't really model that. You can't really price it. The Trump administration imposed tariffs, then threatened 30% tariffs, then negotiated them down to 15% in July 2025 deal in Scotland. Then Trump warned at Davos about possible further duties in Europe. It's a little chaotic. When I analyze investment decisions in finance, this is what kills deals. Not high costs you can plan for, but unknowable costs you really can't plan for. A factory investment requires 20 to 30-year payback horizons. If trade policy is a moving target, those projections become fiction. Here's the catch-22 Volkswagen faces. They need U.S. production to escape tariffs, but tariffs are draining the capital they would need to build that production. Meanwhile, the company's global competitiveness is being destroyed. According to Car Scoops, Audi is eating most of the tariff costs rather than passing them to consumers, which means every vehicle sold in America is less profitable than it has to be. The official narrative from the Trump administration is that tariffs will force foreign companies to build in America. The data shows the opposite happening. The German Economic Institute reports that German exports to the US fell 7.8% in the first 3 quarters of 2025, with auto exports down 17.5%, machinery down 9%, and chemicals down over 10%. These are the sectors that account for over 40% of German exports to America. Before we continue, if you want to sharpen your ability to spot patterns like this in public data, check out my book, Awake, The Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Self-Lies. It's available in ebook and audiobook. Subscribers get 10% off, and you can get the first chapter free using the links in the description. The skills in that book are exactly what help you see through official narratives to what the numbers actually mean. So what does this mean for American power? Here is the pattern most analysts are missing in my view. Capital flight is a leading indicator of geopolitical realignment. When Germany's larger industrial companies start canceling US expansion plans, that's not just about one factory. It is about how those companies are repositioning their entire strategic orientation. According to Yahoo Finance, China is about to replace the United States as Germany's most important trading partner. Total trade with Beijing over the first 11 months of 2025 hit 231 billion euros compared with 222 billion euros with the US. Just think about what that matters. For 75 years, the transatlantic economic partnership has been a pillar of American global influence. Germany anchored its export model on American consumption. American security guarantees backstopped European defense policy. That symbiotic relationship is fracturing in real time now. The German Wholesale and Foreign Trade Association president, Dirk Jandura, put it bluntly, German traders are turning away from the United States and looking for alternative sales markets. He added, the United States remains a very important market for us, but nothing lasts forever. And when you work in finance, you really learn to watch what companies do with their capital, not what governments say about policy necessarily. And what we're seeing is a coordinated de-risking of American exposure. A joint Deloitte and Federation of German Industries report found that 1 in 5 German manufacturing firms have already shifted production abroad, an increase of 8 percentage points in just 2 years. This is how economic partnerships die, not with dramatic announcements, but with quiet cancellations of future plans. Volkswagen's abandoned factory is just the most visible example. According to a Deloitte survey, only 19% of German financial executives are now considering investments in North America, down from 25% previously. That is a structural shift in capital allocation. And here's the kicker, this is affecting America's own industrial capacity. When Volkswagen cancels an Audi plant in the US, that's thousands of American jobs that won't be created. That's suppliers who won't build adjacent facilities. That's tax revenue that won't materialize for state and local governments. The states that were competing to attract Volkswagen's investment, South Carolina, Tennessee, and others, are not getting a consolation prize. They're getting nothing. The Trump administration's theory was that tariffs would act as leverage to force better terms, but leverage requires the other side to value access to your market more than you value their investment. What we're discovering here is that when you make your market unreliable, companies don't respond by accepting your terms, they respond by reducing their exposure to you entirely. Gold hit $5,000 per ounce for the first time as uncertainty about the stability of trade relationships pushed investors towards safe havens. That's not a coincidence either. We have a separate video on that. That's the market pricing in the disintegration of the post-1945 trading order. So what happens next? Here are my predictions. This is irreversible in the short to medium term, in my opinion, and potentially permanent in its strategic implications. First, the immediate trajectory. Even if the Trump administration reversed course tomorrow and eliminated all tariffs, Volkswagen isn't going to immediately commit billions to US expansion. Why? Because they've now learned that American trade policy is volatile and weaponized. That lesson doesn't get unlearned. When you work in finance, you know that once policy risk gets priced into investment decisions, it takes years of demonstrated stability to remove it. Second, Germany is going to accelerate its pivot towards China and other Asian markets. We're already seeing this. Economist Sebastian Dulian warned that the US market is unlikely to be a growth market for German exporters in the foreseeable future, but has instead become risky business. Companies don't make 20-year factory investments in risky business markets. They make those investments in stable, predictable markets. Right now, China and India look a lot more predictable to German executives than America does. Let that sink in. We also have a separate video focusing on the new EU-India deal that Ursula von der Leyen called the mother of all deals. Third, this creates a self-reinforcing cycle. As European companies reduce US exposure, they have less stake in transatlantic institutions. Less stake means less willingness to align with American geopolitical priorities. We're going to see this play out in everything from technology standards to financial regulations to security commitments. The economic coupling that made the transatlantic alliance durable is being unwound slowly. Fourth, and this one is critical, the US is about to discover that being the world's largest market isn't sufficient leverage when your policy is unpredictable. Markets matter, but so does stability. If you're a chief financial officer of a company deciding where to build your next billion-dollar factory, you're going to choose the jurisdiction where you can confidently model your returns over 25 years, right? American policy volatility is actively destroying that confidence. The specific pattern that I would watch personally is how many other major European, Canadian, and Asian industrial companies follow Volkswagen's lead over the next 12 to 24 months. My personal prediction is that we will see at least 3 more major factory cancellations or postponements announcements before the end of 2026. The capital reallocation is already happening. We're just waiting for the public announcements. There's a broader question here about whether America can weaponize its economy without destroying the trust that makes other countries want to integrate with it. The Trump administration is betting that tariff threats will bring companies to heel. The Volkswagen cancellation suggests that they're perhaps achieving the opposite, teaching companies that America is a market to reduce exposure to, not increase it. When this era is studied by historians, I think Volkswagen's abandoned Audi factory will be marked as an inflection point, the moment when major industrial powers stopped treating American market access as a strategic imperative and started treating it as a risk to be managed. The 2.5 billion euros that Volkswagen lost to tariffs in 9 months is the cost of one company learning that lesson. Multiply that across Germany's entire industrial base, then across Europe, then across Canada, then across Asia, and then you start to see the scale of what's being lost. America's economic power was never just about the size of its market. It was about being the predictable anchor of a stable global system. That predictability is being destroyed in real time. And once it's gone, getting it back requires decades of demonstrated reliability. The question is not whether this is happening. The data makes that clear. The question is whether American policymakers recognize what they're losing before the damage becomes irreversible. Now, speaking of Germany and the United States, there is another massive story developing that connects directly to this one. Germany is now openly discussing demanding back the gold reserves they have stored in the United States, and the implications for the dollar are profound in this one. I've done a full analysis on that. Check out the video on your screen. Thank you so much for watching this one, and I'll see you all in the next one.